I thought paying for my son's wedding, 80,000 on flowers, yachts, and champagne, would guarantee me a place at the table. Instead, he stared straight through me and said, "We're keeping it to her family only." 3 days later, newly married, they stood at my doorstep, palm out, demanding the keys to my $3 million Malibu home. I steadied my breath, smoothed my voice, and asked the only question that mattered. "Tell me, exactly when did this house become yours? Because I don't recall signing my life over to you that day." "My name is Cynthia Hall. I live alone in a Malibu beach house, surrounded by salt air, gull cries, and the endless rhythm of the Pacific. Some people see a property worth $3 million, but to me, a 68-year-old widow, it is far more than real estate. It is the last piece of stability Robert left behind, a lifeline holding me steady against the storms of age and grief. Each room carries his voice, every beam soaked in memories of laughter and promises. My son, Raymond, was 35. Once, he was the boy who made me believe love could never fracture. Bright, ambitious, and gentle in his younger years, he leaned on me through fevers, homework, and heartbreaks. I thought that bond was unbreakable. But bonds can be stretched until they snap, and sometimes it doesn't take an earthquake, just a whisper in the wrong ear. That whisper was Bianca. She arrived like a tide I never saw coming, an interior designer with flawless hair and sharper ambitions. Bianca lived her life like it was curated for display. Instagram was her temple, followers her worshippers. Every week she posted immaculate photos of million-dollar projects, gleaming kitchens, sterile living rooms, and marble baths staged more like sets than homes. Everything polished, nothing lived in. Raymond fell under her spell quickly. With her at his side, he walked straighter, spoke louder, and carried himself like he belonged to her world of glossy surfaces. Slowly, I realized she was pulling him into her orbit and pushing me out of it. When Raymond told me they were engaged, I tried to see hope in it. A new chapter, I told myself, perhaps a chance to blend old family with new. I opened my checkbook without hesitation. $80,000 vanished into their dream wedding plans. Yachts that glided across the bay, imported orchids that spilled petals like waterfalls, and champagne towers stacked as if to toast the Pacific itself. I thought it would buy me joy, or at the very least, inclusion. But Bianca's whispers cut sharper than I realized. She painted me as old-fashioned, a stumbling block in their vision. Too traditional, too simple, too unwilling to embrace their luxury fantasy. My son, my own flesh, stood in my living room one evening and repeated her words like scripture. "Mom, the wedding will be held with only her family only. It'll be intimate. You'll understand." But I didn't understand. I couldn't. This was the same boy whose fevers I cooled with damp cloths, whose handwriting I corrected late at night, and whose laughter once echoed through these same halls. Now he was telling me I had no place on the most important day of his life. I stood frozen, my throat closing around words I couldn't force out. Bianca didn't wait for silence. She filled it. She spread her version of the truth to anyone who would listen, that I had interfered, that I had delayed planning, and that my mistakes had ruined everything. By the time the wedding arrived, I was already cast as the villain. While they toasted champagne on a yacht bathed in orchids, I sat at home. The sound of waves pounding against the shore was louder than ever, each crash like a mocking laugh. I stared at framed photos of Raymond as a child and felt something I had never felt before: humiliation. Not just exclusion, but erasure, as if I had never been his mother at all. A week later, the betrayal deepened. My credit card bill arrived in the mail, numbers glowing like sparks from a fire I couldn't put out. $10,000 charged to a resort in Bora Bora. My heart sank. At first, I prayed it was an error. I dialed the number on the statement, voice trembling, as I asked for clarity. But the answer was plain, cruel, and sharp as glass. Bianca had used my card for their honeymoon. Not by mistake, not by accident, without permission, without shame. The money wasn't what made me sick. It was the entitlement, the casual way she treated my years of savings like a faucet to be turned on whenever she wished. And worse still, Raymond's silence. He must have known. He must have watched her slide my card across a counter or enter those numbers online. And he said nothing. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, papers scattered around me, the smell of salt water drifting in through the open window. For the first time, I felt old. Not because of my age, but because they made me feel disposable. Then came the knock. It was late afternoon, the sky bruised with fading light, gulls screeching overhead. I opened the door, and there they stood. Raymond and Bianca dressed as if for a magazine spread. Raymond in tailored slacks, Bianca gleaming in gold jewelry. Their smiles were brittle, their posture rehearsed. "Mom," Raymond began, his voice smooth and practiced, like a salesman working a pitch. "We need to talk about the house." Bianca's gaze swept over the living room, her eyes moving across the furniture, the walls, and the photographs, as though she was already cataloging what would stay and what she would change. Her smile was sharp. "This place is too much for you," she said lightly, as though she were offering advice. $3 million just sitting here when you could be somewhere safer, more manageable. We could start our lives here and really build something. Don't you think that's what Robert would have wanted? They weren't here to apologize. They weren't here to make peace. They had come with a plan. And for the first time, I felt the blood drain from my face. "When?" I asked slowly, my voice trembling. "Did this house become yours?" Raymond stepped closer, lowering his voice as though he was doing me a kindness. "Mom, it's time to transfer the deed. You're too old to handle this place alone." The words burned through me like fire, and in that moment, the truth crystallized. The wedding exclusion, the stolen honeymoon, the whispers of incompetence, it had all been leading here. They weren't just cutting me out of their lives, they were trying to cut me out of my own. Raymond's words sliced through me like glass. Too old, too incompetent. Words I never thought I would hear from the son I had raised with every ounce of my being. He pressed on, his voice soft, rehearsed, the kind people use when delivering bad news they think you should accept. "Mom, this house, it's too much for you. The bills, the upkeep, the stress. You deserve to relax. Let us handle it." Handle it. The words twisted inside me. "Handle it?" I whispered, my hands trembling. Bianca stepped forward, her perfume sharp and cloying, her smile painted onto her face like a mask. "Cynthia, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Guardianship is a legal process. If you can't make sound decisions anymore, the court will step in. We're trying to spare you the embarrassment." Guardianship. The word rang in my ears, foreign and poisonous. That was the kind of word you heard whispered in hospital hallways, not in your own living room. My chest tightened. My voice cracked, but I forced it out. I am perfectly capable of making my own decisions, and this house belongs to me. The air grew heavy, pressing down on all three of us. Raymond rubbed his temples like a man tired of repeating himself. Bianca's eyes glittered with something far darker than concern. "You think you can fight us?" she asked, her tone laced with ice. "Look at the number, Cynthia. You've already wasted over $100,000 on us. $80,000 for the wedding, $20,000 for bills you offered to cover, $10,000 for the honeymoon. That's not competence. That's recklessness." My knees nearly buckled. She was turning my sacrifices into ammunition, twisting gifts into accusations. "That was my gift," I whispered, throat dry, hands clenching at my sides. "A gift because I thought it would bring you happiness." "It did," Bianca said coldly, her eyes never leaving mine. But gifts can't cover up declining judgment. A judge will see that. Raymond lowered his gaze, avoiding mine, too weak to contradict her, too blind to see how far he had fallen into her shadow. My son, my only son, had become a bystander in his own life. The storm didn't stop there. Next came my isolation. It was an ordinary afternoon. I had gone to the grocery store, came home with 2 bags of produce, and somehow locked myself out while juggling them at the door. My keys slipped from my hand, falling between the wooden slats of the porch. I stood outside, flustered, embarrassed, fumbling to retrieve them. That's when my neighbor Linda walked by. At first, she smiled. Then, she frowned. Minutes later, 2 officers—
At first, she smiled. Then she frowned. Minutes later, 2 officers pulled up, asking if I was all right. I thought it was kindness until I realized the truth. Bianca had orchestrated it. Linda, ever eager to gossip about the old widow, filed a note with the police. Just a casual statement. Forgetful, possibly confused. It was enough. Enough to be twisted into something damning. Not long after, I learned Bianca had retained an attorney, Richard Hayes. His reputation was infamous in Malibu, a shark in a tailored suit, a man who thrived on technicalities and manipulation. Slowly, she began stacking her deck. Linda's statement, the flimsy police note, and worst of all, a psychologist's report written by someone she hired, declaring I showed possible signs of cognitive decline. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the words in disbelief, my hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. Decline. The word burned into my eyes. I was still balancing my checkbook, still reading novels, still recalling the names of my students from decades ago. But none of that mattered once someone decided to label you incompetent. Then came the final blow. Bianca, crocodile tears glistening, sat before her phone camera and recorded a video. My mother-in-law is confused. She's reckless with money. We love her and we just want to protect her from herself. Within hours, the video spread like oil on water. Her followers flooded the comments with sympathy. For her, ungrateful mother-in-law. Poor Raymond, saddled with the burden of care. Maybe it's time to take the house before she burns through it all. Every word was a dagger. My name, my life, was being shredded in the court of public opinion before I ever set foot in a real one. For decades, I had been known as a responsible teacher, a steady widow, a careful mother. Now, with a few keystrokes, Bianca reduced me to a helpless caricature. That night, I sat in my living room, the roar of the ocean drowned out by the echo of her voice. Guardianship, incompetence, confused, reckless. The walls of my home felt like they were closing in. The place Robert and I had built together, the place we filled with laughter and memories, had turned into a battlefield where my son and his wife plotted my undoing. I pressed my palm to the cool wood of the coffee table, grounding myself against the weight of betrayal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to fight. I didn't leave the house much after that. Every trip to the store felt like an act of exposure, as if people were whispering about me between the aisles. I caught shadows of glances, imagined smirks. Whether they were real or not, didn't matter. The damage had been done. But sometimes, when you feel most alone, a hand reaches out from the past. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was Blanche Carmichael, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. "Cynthia, come with me," she urged, her voice steady, commanding. "There's a seminar downtown on senior rights. You shouldn't be fighting this alone." Her tone struck me like a bell. It reminded me of who I used to be, the woman who once stood in front of classrooms, strong enough to guide dozens of children each year. I hesitated, but something inside me stirred. And so, I said yes. The seminar was held in a modest community center downtown. Fluorescent lights hummed above rows of folding chairs, the kind that creak if you shift too much. The walls were bare except for flyers about estate planning, guardianship rights, and scams targeting the elderly. Nothing glamorous, but to me, it felt like a sanctuary. Blanche sat beside me, her hand brushing mine whenever my chest tightened. She had always been that way, even back when we taught together. Steady, grounded, the kind of friend who never let fear make the decisions for you. As speakers came and went, I clutched the pamphlets in my lap. Financial exploitation by family, signs of undue influence, what to do if you suspect elder abuse. Each heading made my stomach churn, not because they didn't apply, but because they applied too well. At one point, a lawyer at the podium said, "You are not powerless, you have rights." The words echoed inside me like a lifeline. For weeks, Bianca's whispers had chipped away at my sense of self, painting me as incompetent, reckless, and a burden. Now, for the first time, I felt someone believe me. Afterward, Blanche introduced me to a woman with sharp eyes and a steady handshake. She says, "This is Priya Ashton." She specializes in elder financial abuse. Priya led me to a quiet corner. She didn't interrupt once as I poured out everything: the excluded wedding, the stolen credit card charges, the threats of guardianship, and the staged video. When I finally stopped, exhausted, she leaned forward. "Cynthia, you're not incompetent. You're being manipulated. But feelings alone won't win in court. Evidence will." The words struck me like a gavel. Evidence. That was what I needed. Not just my outrage, not just my voice cracking with betrayal, but hard proof. So I began to dig. At home, I opened drawers and file boxes I hadn't touched in years. Old receipts, bank statements, credit card bills, and even handwritten notes from Raymond when he had once asked for small loans I never expected him to repay. Piece by piece, I assembled a record of the river of money that had flowed out of my life and into theirs. When I totaled it, my breath caught in my throat. Over $100,000 in just 3 years? $80,000 for a wedding I wasn't invited to. $20,000 for temporary bills when they claimed to be between jobs. $10,000 stolen outright for their honeymoon. But the most damning piece was buried in a stack of documents I had almost overlooked. A transaction form with my signature at the bottom. Only, it wasn't my hand. The loops were too wide, the pressure uneven, and the letter shaped like a stranger's attempt at mimicry. Priya studied it carefully. She at last said, "This is forgery, and it's the kind of evidence a judge can't ignore." She wasn't finished. She arranged for me to meet with Dr. Patel, a psychiatrist respected in guardianship cases. I sat nervously in his office, answering questions about memory, reasoning, and daily routines. I worried I would slip, that nerves would make me stumble and feed Bianca's lies. But a week later, Priya called with the results. "Cynthia, you are fully competent. No signs of decline." Relief washed over me, but it was threaded with fury. All the lies Bianca had spread, all those crocodile tears on camera. And here was the truth. Black and white, undeniable. With Priya's guidance, I began fortifying my life. I canceled Raymond and Bianca's access to my accounts, cutting off the back doors they had slipped through. I hired a locksmith, replacing every lock with fresh steel, the keys cool and solid in my palm. Cameras blinked to life in the corners of my home, silent guardians watching over the place Robert and I had built together. Finally, I sat at my desk, the sea breeze curling through the window, and drafted an agreement of my own. Raymond would repay the $10,000 Bianca had stolen, and if he wanted to keep any relationship with me, he would renounce his claim to the inheritance. That night, I gathered everything: bank statements, forged documents, Dr. Patel's evaluation, into a thick folder. I pressed it against my chest, the weight heavy but empowering. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt more than fear. I felt resolved. The next morning, I woke to the crash of waves and knew I was no longer waiting for them to destroy me. I was preparing to fight back. The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was colder than I expected. Its marble floors echoed with the shuffle of footsteps, its walls towering with authority. I clutched the folder Priya had helped me assemble, the thick stack of evidence pressing into my ribs as though reminding me to breathe. When I entered the courtroom, Raymond and Bianca were already seated across the aisle. Raymond avoided my eyes, his hands folded too neatly in his lap. Bianca, dressed in cream blazer and dramatic earrings, looked like she was preparing to host a press conference rather than face a judge. The bailiff called the room to order. My heart thudded in my chest as the judge entered. The case had begun.
Bianca's lawyer, Richard Hayes, wasted no time. He stood like a man born for the stage, his voice smooth as silk, his words sharpened to cut. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not simply a matter of inheritance or property. This is about protection. Mrs. Hall is fragile. She's unstable. She's reckless with money. Her son and daughter-in-law have stepped up to provide care she clearly cannot manage for herself." The words stabbed like knives. My hands gripped the folder in my lap until the edges bent. Then came the evidence. The screen flickered and a video played. There I was, in my own kitchen, my voice raised, my hands trembling as I slammed a drawer. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Hayes spread his arms with a flourish. "That," he declared, "is not the behavior of someone capable of managing a multi-million-dollar property." I wanted to scream, to shout the truth, but Priya's hand touched my arm, a silent command. Wait. Linda was called next. My neighbor looked nervous, wringing her hands as she spoke. "I saw Cynthia outside her house. She couldn't get in. She seemed lost." Her words dripped with implication. Then the hired psychologist took the stand. Reading from a report, he spoke in clinical tones. "Possible signs of cognitive decline, difficulty managing finances, questionable judgment." Whispers spread through the courtroom like smoke. My reputation, 40 years of steady teaching, mothering, surviving, was unraveling in front of strangers. But then it was Priya's turn. She rose calmly, her voice steady, as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the video presented is incomplete and misleading. Allow me to show you the unedited version." The screen lit again. This time, the full footage from my security camera appeared. The moment in my kitchen, me slamming the drawer, but now the lead-up was visible. A cupboard jammed, a pot falling, landing on my foot, my cry of pain followed by frustration. Then, moments later, I was breathing deeply, tidying up, and composing myself. "This," Priya said, firmly, "is not incompetence. This is editing." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward, his expression darkening. Next, Priya presented the transaction form, the one with my forged signature. She held them side by side with my genuine handwriting. The differences were undeniable. "Forgery," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, "by none other than Mrs. Bianca Hall." Bianca stiffened, her painted smile cracking at the edges. Finally, Priya placed Dr. Patel's evaluation on the record. "Independent psychiatric analysis confirms that Mrs. Hall is fully competent. No signs of cognitive decline. No grounds for guardianship." Blanche took the stand next, her voice unwavering. "I've known Cynthia for decades. She is sharp, independent, and thoughtful. She runs her household better than most of us." Members of my book club echoed her words. describing conversations, plans, and the meticulous way I still handled details. When it was time for cross-examination, Priya pressed Linda with precision. "You said Cynthia looked confused. Did you actually see her resolve the situation?" Linda hesitated. "Well, no, I just assumed." "Assumptions," Priya cut in, her tone firm. "Not facts, not evidence." The judge scribbled notes. The tide was turning. Then Bianca snapped. Her voice, sharp and shrill, rose above the quiet. "This is ridiculous. She's lying. They're all lying. I know what I saw, and I know she can't handle herself." "Mrs. Hall," the judge interrupted, his tone icy. "Sit down." The silence that followed was deafening. At last, Priya nodded to me. My turn. My legs trembled as I walked to the stand, but when I looked at Raymond, my son, my boy, I felt the weight of everything I had endured pressing against my ribs. "I am not my son's bank," I said, my voice steady despite the tears burning in my eyes. "I am his mother, and I deserve respect." The words hung in the air. For a moment, the courtroom was utterly still. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke with finality. "Petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Hall is fully competent to manage her affairs. Furthermore, Mrs. Bianca Hall is ordered to repay the $10,000 taken without authorization. This court warns you, Mrs. Hall, elder financial abuse will not be tolerated." The gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. Relief swept through me like a wave crashing against the shore. But as the courtroom emptied, I caught Bianca leaning toward Raymond, her lips curling into a smile that was anything but sweet. "We're not finished," she hissed. And in that moment, I knew the battle was far from over. For weeks after the judge's gavel came down, I felt like I could breathe again. The nightmare had not ended, but it had paused. In that pause, I rediscovered the smallest luxuries: coffee on the porch without dread gnawing at me, a walk along the beach without scanning faces for judgment, and sleep without waking to Bianca's voice echoing in my head. But the illusion of peace was short-lived. One afternoon, my phone lit up with a message from Raymond. "That house is our future, Mom." My fingers trembled as I read the words. He hadn't written, "to your house." He had written, "our future." Even after the court had spoken, even after Bianca had been exposed for forgery, Raymond still believed he was entitled to what Robert and I had built with decades of sacrifice. The blows didn't stop there. Bianca had turned to her favorite stage, social media. She posted moody photos, her captions vague but barbed. Some mothers only know how to take, never how to give. Her followers rushed to her defense. Strangers painted me as the villain, the cold mother, and the greedy widow. My name was never written, but everyone knew. And yet the cracks in her perfect facade had begun to spread. Through neighbors, I learned that one of her wealthiest clients had severed ties. The courtroom drama had been too public, too embarrassing. The glamorous designer with million-dollar projects now faced mounting debts and whispers about her credibility. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt a storm brewing. It came one night when thunder rolled over Malibu, the sky alive with lightning, rain lashing against my windows like 1,000 accusing fingers. I sat in the living room, a book in my lap I wasn't reading, when headlights cut through the storm and parked in my driveway. Raymond and Bianca. They were soaked, but determined, clutching a folder as though it were a prize. When I opened the door, they wasted no time pressing it into my hands. "It's a buyout contract. $1 million, Mom. We'll take the house off your hands. Make it easier for you. It's fair. Fair." My stomach twisted. This house was worth $3 million.
and they knew it. "This is not fair," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is theft dressed in paperwork." "Mom, please." Raymond's eyes shone, his voice breaking with urgency. "We're family. This house is the foundation we need. Think about what Dad would want, for his son to have a legacy, to build a life here with his family." His words cut deep. Robert's memory was sacred. But before I could respond, Bianca stepped forward. She pressed her hand against her stomach, her eyes glistening with tears that seemed too perfect, too rehearsed. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm pregnant. Your grandchild will grow up without a home because of you." My breath caught. Pregnant. For a fleeting moment, hope and fear collided inside me. The thought of a grandchild, of Raymond as a father, it pierced through my armor. But then I saw it. The glint in Bianca's eyes, the tilt of her phone in her other hand, the faint reflection of a lens peeking between her fingers. She was recording me. "You're lying," I said flatly. Her tears fell harder, her voice louder, perfectly timed for the invisible audience watching through her screen. "See, she's unstable. She can't make rational decisions." "Time out," I snapped. My voice cracked like the thunder outside. "Turn that camera off." But she didn't. Raymond clasped his hands, stepping closer, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Please, Mom, just sign it. If not, we'll have no choice." The words chilled me.
No choice? Another lawsuit? Another smear campaign? Or something darker? I looked at him, my son, the boy I had once carried in my arms, now standing before me as a stranger, a puppet moved by a woman whose ambition had consumed him. The rain pounded harder, rattling the windows. And I realized the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was here, inside my home. For a moment, their words pierced me. Bianca's hand on her stomach, her trembling voice, and Raymond's pleading eyes. It was almost enough to make me falter. But the weight of every betrayal pressed harder. I knew better than to believe a single word spilling from Bianca's lips. I steadied myself, drew in a breath. "Let me think," I said quietly, forcing calm into my voice. "I need to sit in the living room for a moment." They exchanged a glance. Raymond's shoulders relaxed. Bianca's lips curled into a smile that told me she thought she had won. They let me walk away, certain I was crumbling. But in the living room, with the storm raging outside, I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers trembled as I dialed. Priya answered on the second ring. "Cynthia, are you safe?" I whispered. "They're here. They want me to sign the house over. She's pretending to be pregnant." Priya's voice was sharp and steady, a lifeline in the chaos. "Do not sign anything. Turn on your cameras, call the police right now. Tomorrow we'll file for a restraining order, no matter what happens tonight. Do you understand?" "Yes," I breathed. I ended the call, flipped the switch on my security system, and watched the small red lights blink to life. Then I dialed the local police. My words rushed out but were precise. Trespassing, harassment, threats. They promised officers were on their way. My heart steadied as I walked back into the main room. Bianca's phone was already raised, her expression one of feigned concern. She was performing for her audience. "See, she's stable. She can't make rational decisions." Raymond looked torn, his hands wringing, caught between guilt and loyalty. I stood tall, she looked directly into the lens of her phone, and spoke so clearly the storm itself seemed to pause. "Raymond, you chose Bianca and money over your mother. This house is mine, and I've rewritten my will. You will never get a cent, not even when I die." Bianca's eyes widened, her mask cracking. For once, her tears dried instantly.
Raymond's face went pale. "Mom," he stammered, "you can't mean that." "I mean every word," I said, my voice like iron. And then the rising wail of sirens cut through the storm. Blue lights flashed against the rain-streaked windows as the sirens grew louder. The knock on the door was firm and authoritative. 2 officers stepped inside, their uniforms soaked at the shoulders, their eyes scanning the scene. Bianca's phone was still raised, the contracts spread across my table, my fists trembling at my sides. I steadied myself. The officers turned to Raymond and Bianca. "You need to leave, now." "What?" Bianca's voice pitched high, shrill. "She's crazy. You don't understand." "Enough," one officer cut her off. "We'll be documenting this as trespassing and harassment. If you refuse to leave, we'll remove you by force." Raymond tugged at Bianca's arm, but she yanked free, glaring at me with a hatred so raw it made my chest ache. Still, under the officers' watchful eyes, they had no choice. The door slammed behind them, leaving only the echo of rain and my own heartbeat. Later that night, Priya called back. "The report the officers filed will give us exactly what we need. We'll move forward with the restraining order first thing tomorrow." She was right. Within days, I held the order in my hands. Bianca's carefully crafted video, her performance of tears and false concern, backfired spectacularly. My cameras had captured everything. Her phone raised, her staged pleas, her lies collapsing in real time. Online, the tide turned. Where once her followers called me cruel, now they labeled her what she was: fraud, manipulator, abuser. Raymond sent me a letter soon after. His handwriting was shaky, his words hollow. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean it to go this far." I read it once, folded it neatly, put it away. Some doors, once closed, cannot be opened again. The Malibu house had never been just wood and stone. It was the place Robert and I had built our life, where our laughter echoed down the halls, where Raymond once ran barefoot with sand in his hair. But after everything, the walls no longer felt safe. They felt haunted by betrayal. So I made a decision. One person told me it was madness. I sold it. $3 million of prime beachfront property gone in a matter of weeks. Friends shook their heads, neighbors whispered, "Why walk away?" they asked. But I wasn't walking away. I was reclaiming my freedom. With the proceeds, I bought a modest condo in Santa Barbara. Smaller, yes. Simpler, yes. But filled with light, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It wasn't a palace. It was peace. Before handing over the Malibu keys, I hosted one final gathering, a farewell. Neighbors, friends, members of my book club, and even Blanche came. We walked through the house together, remembering the good years. But before the night ended, I stood in the living room and unfolded a piece of paper, my new will. My voice didn't shake as I read, "To my son, Raymond Hole, and his wife, Bianca Hole, I leave nothing. They are cut out entirely." Gasps filled the room, but I didn't stop. What I leave instead, I leave to causes and people who know the meaning of respect. The words hung in the air, final and unmovable. From the sale, I donated $500,000 to the DOJ's Elder Justice Initiative. It wasn't just money. It was a promise that others trapped in the same nightmare would know they weren't alone. In Santa Barbara, I began again. My condo buzzed with life. Neighbors who became fast friends, walks along the cliffs at sunrise. I even took up painting. The first strokes were clumsy and hesitant, but slowly color returned to my world. For the first time in years, my days weren't measured in dread or court dates. They were measured in sunsets, laughter, and the steady rhythm of my own breath. With Priya's encouragement, I wrote an op-ed about elder financial abuse. I poured everything onto the page, the manipulation, the lies, the betrayal, and the fight to take my life back. When it was published, letters flooded in. Seniors from across the country wrote to me, sharing their own stories. They told me they finally felt seen, that my voice had given them courage. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was an advocate. One evening, I sat on my balcony, the Pacific stretching endlessly before me. The same ocean that had once mocked me now felt like it was welcoming me home. I held Robert's photo in my hands. The corners were worn soft from years of touch. His eyes, kind, steady, familiar, looked back at me. I whispered into the wind, "I did it, Robert. I am no one's wallet anymore. I am free." The waves roared below, carrying my words out into the horizon, and for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled. I realized that true strength is not in holding on to what others demand, but in protecting the dignity we've built through a lifetime of sacrifice. Freedom means drawing boundaries, even when it hurts, and refusing to be silenced by manipulation. At this age, we've earned the right to peace, respect, and choice. If this story touched you, tap like, subscribe for more first-person stories of resilience, and tell me in the comments which moment shook you most. And share your own journey. I would love to listen.